To Washington now, where President Trump ignored warnings from national security advisors and called Russian President Vladimir Putin to congratulate him on winning the election.
President Trump failed to address a list of issues with Putin, like the suspected poisoning of a former spy in the UK, new sanctions, and Russia's election meddling. Chip Reid has more from the White House.
The State Department is standing by a report that says the Russian election restricted fundamental freedoms. The president's call to Putin comes as the White House is considering a plan to expel Russian diplomats following the poisoning of a former spy in the UK.
We had a very good call.
President Trump spoke with the Russian president Tuesday and offered him well wishes on getting reelected to a fourth term and 6 more years.
I had a call with President Putin and congratulated him on the victory.
But CBS News has learned that Mr. Trump's advisors warned him explicitly not to congratulate Putin. Most international observers consider it a rigged election.
Calling him wouldn't have been high on my list.
Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was one of several Republicans to criticize the president.
When I look at a Russian election, what I see is a lack of credibility.
Arizona Republican John McCain said an American president does not lead the free world by congratulating dictators on winning sham elections.
The Russian government was looking for the vulnerabilities in our election system.
On the same day, the Senate Intelligence Committee recommended ways to improve election security. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said the president did not raise the issue of Russian interference in the election with Putin.
I don't believe it came up on this specific call.
Nor did he mention the recent poisoning of a former Russian spy in England, widely attributed to Moscow.
I don't believe that was discussed in today's call.
Mr. Trump's aides had suggested he mentioned both issues, according to the Washington Post.
But it's clear to me we're not sending the right message to Putin about
South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham said the omissions were disappointing.
Every time you talk to Putin and you give him a pass, that emboldens him.
President Trump is not the only world leader who congratulated Putin. The head of the European Union also congratulated him and did not mention the poisoning of the former spy in the UK. President Trump said that he and Putin will meet in the not-too-distant future, but the White House says no date is set. Vlad and Anne-Marie?
Chip Reid, thank you. So for more on this, we want to bring in James Pindell. He's a political reporter for the Boston Globe. James, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we've seen other lawmakers like Senator Bob Corker say that he's not overly concerned with President Trump calling Putin and that we shouldn't really read too much into this. Is that really the case, or is this a national security or a policy issue? I know it's not, odd for a president to call the leader of another country and congratulate them upon winning the election, but when you put everything in context, it certainly seems a little odd.
Well, I mean, what is stunning is 2 things about the last 24 hours on this particular subject. First is that you had a change in American foreign policy, whether wittingly or unwittingly, where generally a bipartisan agreement has been to spread democracy around the globe and to be pretty hardcore about it. In this particular case, we have literal video of people stuffing ballot boxes in Russia. And most people believe this was pretty much a sham election. The idea that A, we would congratulate someone on that, and B, who administers an election, and B, the idea from Sarah Sanders that we don't talk about how other countries want to do their elections. Of course we do. We have done it for decades. It was stunning to see that reversal in the White House defense of it. And the second part was how quickly after President Trump said that he congratulated Putin, we saw these leaks from his own national security team saying, well, I didn't tell him to do that, splashed over the pages of the Washington Post. This is a very small inner circle of a very small inner circle. So both developments were quite stunning to watch.
Yeah, James, my take on this is that it perhaps isn't strange at all for a president to call another head of state and talk to them about issues that are important to the two countries. In other words, you can call Putin and say, here's what I want you to know. You won an election, seemingly you won an election, but we want to remind you that we are not happy with using weapons of mass destruction on the soil of our ally in the UK, and as it comes to this poisoning and a whole host of other issues. And Mr. President, you can do more to make your elections free and fair. In other words, press the case, as we always has, as you point out, that we want free and fair elections no matter where they are, even when it comes to partners that we may have economic interests with.
Yeah, and look, let's keep in mind that on the international stage, what's happening? If we have our three main rivals that we're going high-stakes relationships with here, being Russia, being China, and being North Korea right now, the leaders in all three of those countries have only become more emboldened domestically. This has been very good for the popularity of Kim Jong-un. This has been very good, obviously, for Putin to show these strong re-election numbers, if you want to buy into that, and then clearly look at the situation that's happening in China. Meanwhile, President Trump, while his approval ratings have been ticking up a little bit, still remains the most unpopular president at this point in his presidency in modern American times, and continues to be quite divisive, and having questions from his own members of his own party questioning about what he's going to do to Russia. It's a pretty stunning moment.
And then I think when you consider the fact that, you know, there may be this meeting between the president and Kim Jong-un, like you mentioned, the Washington Post is reporting that his advisors wrote in big capital letters, "Do not congratulate Putin." And he disregarded them, obviously, and then told all the rest of us about it, about the congratulatory phone call. You got to wonder, when he's walking into a meeting with someone like Kim Jong-un, is he going to disregard the advice of his advisors again?
Well, look, I think what we're seeing is a pattern here with President Trump that may be a positive development. He views these relationships, these internet relationships with different countries, as being personal. That if they can work together, him and Putin, if they can work together, him and maybe Kim Jong-un, that they can solve some of these bigger problems. The question is whether when he leaves that room, if anything he just said matters, or if he blew up something and it creates the situation worse. I mean, look, he's tried to also have this personal relationship with members of Congress. He did it in January when it came. He said that he would take the heat and do a big comprehensive immigration bill, and then after he left the office, we still don't have anything on that. He said it last month when it came to guns. We still don't have anything on that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure where we're going to be headed here, but he clearly believes that these personal relationships he's going to have with these leaders matters more than it does the actual pronouncements of policy.
And James, that's what I think is sort of bizarre about all this, because the president may want to have a personal relationship with these heads of state. I don't know that they feel the same way. Vladimir Putin is a former KGB agent. He's an assassin by all accounts of people who are familiar with his background. Kim Jong-un is a murderous dictator. The president may want to have a great relationship with these folks and say that I can get them on the phone and we have a chat and we're even going to meet, although he offered no specifics about when he would actually be meeting with Vladimir Putin. And they may all do that for the cameras, and they may be smiles and handshakes when there are cameras present. But does anybody seriously think that Vladimir Putin goes back into his residence and thinks, I've got a great relationship with the president of the United States? I'm thinking the only thing he thinks is that, you know, I can do whatever I want because all I have to do is be nice to President Trump.
Look, you bring up a great point, which is that what Putin is doing, what President Xi is doing in China, and what Kim Jong-un is doing are all things with the personal relationship rooted in their country's particular agenda, right? And if you take what Trump is doing, it's based on just a relationship with Trump. We're not sure exactly what the American agenda is behind that. And take that in contrast to where we were with George W. Bush, who also had tried to create this personal relationship with Putin. As he famously said, he saw his soul the first time that they met. But then that relationship, of course, became more rocky because Bush came in there with an American agenda, trying to create a personal relationship to push that American agenda. Did the same thing with China. Some areas he's successful, some areas he was not, but the relationship became rocky. What Trump is trying to say here, as long as I get along with this person, I'm not sure exactly if the American agenda will be advanced necessarily, but, you know, I got a good relationship and we're keeping the lines of communication open, which is a different change of how we usually view American presidents.
Well, I would point folks to our history and point to Ronald Reagan's relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev. They,
Absolutely.
by all accounts, had a respectful relationship.
Yeah.
President Reagan did, but he was not afraid to say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. He was not afraid to go on the record about the things the Soviet Union was doing, even though, by all accounts, they both respected each other as world leaders, James.
Right.
We got to leave it there. Thank you very much for that insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.